Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, calling in from Berkeley, California, but also an America under siege. Kind of joking. And as always, I'm joined by
Bob Bazanko. I'm in the Buckeye State today and also living in the occupied states of America right now, too. So, which is something we'll talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's been a big news week, and we have a lot of thoughts and we have a lot of things that we want to share today as we get scrappy with what all is going on in the world. And as always, we're actually going to kick off with radical history, which we've tried to make a little bit relevant to the events of the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to kick off with April in 1985 is when at the University of California at Berkeley, here where I am, there was an ongoing occupation for South African divestment. The first occupation actually happened in early April. It led to the arrest of 156 students. The students went, as we were seeing right now in campuses all over the country, as soon as they're arrested, as soon as their occupation is ended or cleared, they actually go and reoccupy. At Berkeley in 1985, they reoccupied and declared a strike where 10,000 students and faculty joined. And then that was around the end of the school year, and the occupations started again in the fall. And the campus raided again and built again. And eventually it led to divestment at the University of California at Berkeley. The other thing I want to mention, which is like a pretty significant anniversary this week, is April 30th, 1968 was actually the 56th anniversary of Hamilton Hall at Columbia. It's actually where they had actually been occupying it for about a week. And it was April 30th, the day that the NYPD, the National Guard, the university, police, whoever went and cleared it, which is the same day in which Columbia was cleared this week in New York City as well. And the anniversary is not coincidental, but as we said in a recent episode, is that the Columbia students are brilliant strategists, and they completely played into and saw the lines between 1968 and 2024. The other anniversary I want to talk about is May Day, May 1st, 1971. They kicked off 5 days of anti-war May Day protests in Washington, D.C., where they were occupying the city, blocking bridges, blocking roads, all of that sort of thing. Over 14,000 were arrested. It was actually it's the largest civil disobedience in U.S. history. It was organized by the May Day tribe. People like Jerry Rubin were involved with that. Also a pretty significant direct action in U.S. history, something that we all should continue to strive for.
Isn't that the basis of Norman Mailer's book, Armies of the Night?
Well, I think that's about the 67 March on the Pentagon.
Okay.
Yeah.
A couple more May events. May 1st, again, in 1886, the genesis of May Day in the United States was a general strike for the 8-hour day, which led to a cop mayhem, as always, in Chicago and the Haymarket riots. And we eventually did get May Day out of it, but that didn't last long. And we've done a show on this because the government co-opted it and created Labor Day in September, which is the only industrialized country to do that. Of course, May 4th is particularly relevant. Let's hope it's not more relevant than it already is. May 4th, 1970, which is one of our better shows, I think, which we did early on. The National Guard, at the behest of Governor James Rhodes, was sent into Kent State University after an ROTC building was burnt down, after there were protests following Nixon's invasion of Cambodia. The Guard had live ammunition and unleashed a volley of fire, killing 4 students and wounding 11 others. And then 2 weeks after that, there were also shootings, and I think 3 dead at Jackson State in Mississippi. I'm not sure the precise number. So Kent State has been on a lot of people's minds, and hopefully we don't get to that point. It's terrifying to think that we could. All bets are off at this point, right?
And we'll be reposting that episode in a couple of days
definitely
as well.
That. On a better note, on May 5th, Karl Marx was born in 1818, and he is the second most famous May 5th birthday, next to the co-host of the Green and Red podcast, Scott Parkin, right? We got you, and I've been at Marx's graves, and I know you. So, and I've been at Che's memorial. I've done it all, right? And then finally, one that
I
we
saw Ho Lane and State
you
twice.
saw, I know,
So
I need to do that for sure. And then finally, another one that's really relevant, which we're not hearing about as much. And right now, if you look at the list of college encampments, there are several which are occurring outside the United States. And May of 1968 was famous for upheavals all over the world, really. And perhaps the biggest was actually in France. On May 7th, 1968, there was a revolt by students and workers. It was really the kind of dream where everybody comes together. They were demanding democracy, educational reform, workplace reform, better working conditions. They occupied both campuses and factories. This crisis continued for several weeks after that. And it gave us the beautiful slogan, which I often use, which is be realistic, demand the impossible. And so in the interest of bringing May 1968 around, that's good advice, right? Be realistic, demand the impossible. Those are the history events this week. And now, as always, we're going to just rant and scrappily rave about certain things that have been on our mind. And I think you know what some of them are already, but Scott, you want to take the lead on that?
yeah, we're going to go from radical history events to current events.
Yeah.
We'll kick off with a quote that our president, Joe Biden, said today in response to the campus protest, which is dissent must never lead to disorder. There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos. He talked a lot today to the press about disruption and classes getting canceled and people being mean to each other on campus and things like that. I do want to just kick this off with pointing out that every university in Gaza has been destroyed by the Israelis using American weapons. And so there's a level of disruption and disorder going on there, Joe, that you're not really actually taking into account, which is why we see these encampments all over the country, 120 campuses, I believe, at last count. So I want to point that out just to kick this off.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out that we absolutely have a right to cause chaos. We have every right to cause chaos. When I saw this today, it reminded me in my classes, when I get to the 60s, I show them some of Richard E. Nixon, as Archie Bunker called him, ads from 1968. And the theme of all of them is law and order. And they use that all the time. Dissent must leave. We have a right to free speech. This is exactly Nixonian, right? And remember Richard Nixon's famous outburst in 1970. He said, after Kent State, he said, "You see these bums blowing up the campuses? Listen, the boys that are on college campuses today are the luckiest people in the world, going to the greatest universities. And here they are burning up the books, storming around about this issue," right? So we now have Joseph, Richard E. Nixon, Biden, right? And again, this is what we've been saying for our whole lives, really. When we get to certain core issues, they can quibble. Democrats and Republicans can quibble around the margins, education funding, tax policies, things like that, and important stuff. But on core issues, they're the exact same, right? And when it comes to what they perceive to be order, which means their absolute control and crushing anyone who stands in the way of what they perceive to be their interest, they are in lockstep. And I may point out,
True
bipartisanship, and some of the people who actually have broken from this are quite surprising, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, I think it's important to understand what we're dealing with right now, because a lot of people, I see these memes, Joe Biden is a good and decent man, and Biden and Trump are not the same, and he's not the lesser evil. And the fact of the matter is he's clearly sponsoring whatever we want to call it, genocide, atrocities, human rights violations, ethnic cleansing, the whole 9 yards in Gaza. And on college campuses, he's basically green lighting all these cops, right? And remember, in the summer of 2020, the first time that word defund was uttered, and we can have a discussion over whether that's a good idea or not. But the fact is, as soon as that word defund was uttered, Democrats dashed in, including Bernie Sanders, and said, "Oh no, we don't hate the police, and we're all going to get along, and we're unifiers." And they all gave the cops more money on this kind of lesser of evil, vote blue no matter who. If you want to take it that far, it ain't much of a difference there. And Biden clearly has given green lights to these vicious attacks on campus. And I'm sure all of you have seen them. It's hard not to, and they're gut wrenching and stomach churning as well.
Yeah, and just to talk about that a little bit, there've been two pretty significant ones this week. One is where the NYPD sent in their special response group to clear Columbia. Columbia has been the sort of epicenter of this sort of campus revolt against the genocide in Gaza. Really started many months ago, but 2 weeks ago, we really saw it begin to escalate after Manouche Shafek, the president, who's an economist and an Egyptian baroness, sent the NYPD in and arrested 100 students. The students reoccupied. And then this week, on April 30th, on Tuesday night, 56 years after the last time, or another big clearing of the student protest occupation, they cleared it again. Same night, they also went and cleared City College in New York. That day, 282 people were arrested who were resisting this idea of order, whether it's order on the streets of New York or other parts of the country, or this idea of order in places like Gaza, where the Israeli has decided to just demolish the entire place and kill everyone who's there.
Let me just say one thing, because in liberal minds now, a lot of liberals, not all, of course, but it's the same. They're taking this Zionist position that these students who are camping in nonviolently on public space or space where they are paying perhaps $60 to $80 to $100,000 in tuition, these people are there nonviolently, and they need to be violently rooted out. At the same time, they're defending Israel, who goes into places like West Bank and Gaza, physically destroys homes, kills people, sends in settlers from Brooklyn and Europe and everywhere else to steal their land. New Jersey, Brooklyn, yeah. So they're all in for settler colonialism in Israel and Palestine. But when it comes to an encampment on either public space or space where students have paid huge amounts of tuition to sit there nonviolently and have discussions, have debates, have teach-ins, have cedars, they turn into jackbooted thugs, right? And they're channeling, like Greg Abbott is. I'm not sure if he wants to be Mussolini or Pol Pot, right? But this is what we're seeing now. Occupation in Gaza and West Bank is just fine and dandy. Violent occupations are fine and dandy. But here in the United States, simply protesting based on your First Amendment right to protest and to cause chaos is being attacked violently by these people. Are frightening. It's really scary how they're doing it. I have a thing here I want to read, and there have been so many accounts, but this is a one that kind of just struck me. It's from an anthropologist at Indiana, Sarah D. Phillips, who wrote in the Chronicle of Higher Education. I'm a professor at Indiana University at Bloomington, not a radical school by any means, right? Where I was arrested this past weekend. After receiving social media messages reporting a heavy police presence at a student rally, I rushed to the public gathering space on campus known as Dunn Meadow. There I saw my students among unarmed, peaceful protesters. I saw the state police in riot gear approaching them with batons, right? It's like Ferguson. It sounds like Colombia in the 1980s during the drug wars, right? I saw still more police toting assault rifles. I couldn't believe my eyes. A few minutes later, I had a riot shield pressed against my face. I was forced to the ground and told to roll into my stomach. My wrists were cuffed tightly behind my back. I looked to my left. There was my student, likewise prone, battered, and cuffed. I looked to my right. Another student, prone, battered, and cuffed. These are just observers. These are people who are simply standing there, and the police are doing these sweeps. They don't have to kettle students because they're already self-contained. But this is what we saw in the summer of 2020. This is what police do. As we pointed out the other day, we had a show with our friend Clayton Lust. Cops are out there to defend ruling class interests. And so clearly there's this kind of racial animus, which is always emphasized, but there's way more to it than that. The vigor and the enthusiasm and the zeal which they go into these places and attack students, professors, see people older than you and me, right?
Seniors, elders are
elders, right? Like real elders, not like you and me elders, but like real elders, right? It's reminiscent of the Buffalo police. Remember when they gave a brain bleed to Martin Gugino, the guy who was like 78 years old or something like that, right?
Just it was a peace activist,
right? And that's what we're seeing today. And in the midst of these images, what does Joe Biden say? We can't have disorder. These campus scenes are just terrifying. And we'll talk more about that later because I know that means a lot to both of us.
Yeah, the other thing I want to point out just to bring into this is also what the night that they cleared Columbia, which they had renamed Hind Hall after the young 6-year-old who had hidden terrified in her car after the Israelis had murdered her family and murdered paramedics which were trying to rescue her. They renamed Hamilton Hall Hind Hall. But the other thing that happened that night, which was at UCLA, which was a precursor for what happened last night, which is that we saw this organized mob of about 200 Zionists and we've also found out right-wing, Proud Boy types all went and attacked the encampment at UCLA, University of California at Los Angeles, and the police just stood by. There's one instance where like 5 or 6 campus cops tried to break something up, but then they got scared and they left. Shocking, I know. And there's this other element, which is that these organized right-wing groups and Zionist groups are also like and sometimes they're just like lone wolf actors too, but are just like actively trying to cause a lot of trouble. And what should have been a normal response to 200 people basically trying to beat up a bunch of students is that then we saw last night this joint operation of the LAPD and the California Highway Patrol and the Sheriff's Department and the campus police go in and just completely brutalize the UCLA encampment. People were standing strong. The UAW Local 4811 has gone on strike, and many of the workers went out and stood with the students, but it was like a war zone. If you watch the video, you saw 5 people. I've seen reports that 5 people were shot in the head with rubber bullets, which are rubber coated steel bullets. They deployed over 20 flashbangs into the crowd. There have been 182 arrests confirmed by the CHP. And there's an issue related to what everyone from Biden on down is saying about why we need to break up these encampments is it's about safety. And it's like Jewish students don't feel safe and things like that. But like when we see this level of violence coming from the police, given the order by the administrators or the politicians or whatever, egged on by politicians, we actually really know who is truly safe. Like it's a miracle someone didn't actually get killed at UCLA last night.
Yeah. The people to be most afraid of, obviously, are the police. And also, I think it's worth noting that New York and Los Angeles, which have had the most violent responses, are as blue as you get. Pretty much the entire city elected officials
and all the
states, right? New York and California. That's the liberal elite.
And just also, I want to note that Gavin Newsom has called for an investigation about the Zionist mob at UCLA, but it's the Highway Patrol, which actually were part of this. They were actually the ones who went into the encampment, if you read how the operation went. And so that's under his control, right? Sure. This violence that happened at the UCLA encampment was like, it wasn't necessarily the mayor of LA or even the president of UCLA. It was like Gavin Newsom. Just want to point that out.
Yeah. And another one of the ruses they're pulling, which is from the oldest trick in the book, right, is they're saying that outside agitators are creating these problems. And again, for one thing, like campuses are public spaces. Every campus, every state campus, Ohio State, University of Houston, UT, any state campus I've ever been on, has crazy people out there quoting the Bible and saying the end is near, right? It's a public space. So the idea that outside people aren't allowed on there is bullshit anyway. But the fact is, outside agitators, like the New York Times has discovered that Lisa Fithian, who has been a guest and who's been a great friend, right, is an outside agitator. Lisa Fithian is a labor organizer. That's a great history in the United States of people who organize among workers and among other groups, right? And it's nonviolent direct action, right? And so they're trying to create these. Well, if you want to talk about outside agitators, who's training these police forces in the United States? Who's helping create Cop City and Atlanta? Who's training these special forces in Memphis? It's not labor organizers. It's not UAW organizers. It's not campus. It's not Scott Parkin. Who's doing all that? It's the IDF. The IDF is doing that. And I don't believe that in that mob at UCLA, there weren't IDF vets there or people like that.
That's also part of the story now is that they were.
Yeah, it's okay. This is my first thing I thought. I was like, come on.
I also want to say something about Cop City is that we know about Atlanta and we know about Memphis. There's one here in the Bay Area. There's actually 69 Cop Cities being built around the U.S. 69. That's a crazy number. And that's modeled on IDF training, which they have used to basically police the West Bank and Gaza.
And that's how many tens of billions of dollars not being spent on homelessness or COVID or crazy shit like healthcare or education or whatever, right?
And we could go into, there have been the beauty of what's happening. The beauty and the inspiring part about it is that there's so many actions happening, and that when they clear camps, students are back trying to camp out again, or they're going to do other actions at Yale. 50 were arrested on Monday, and they cleared the camp, and yet they went and did a march to the president's house with like hundreds of people through his neighborhood, and then they put an encampment back the next day. University of Texas, Dallas, University of New Hampshire, Dartmouth, like all these places where Indiana University in Bloomington, right? Yeah. All these places are like fighting back hard.
A few days ago, I think it's CARE, the Muslim group, is keeping a list of encampments. And just a few days ago, I think it was at like 12, about a week ago, it was at 12. Then a few days ago, it was up to 48. Today, it's over 120. The more they crush and repress, the more resistance they actually create, which is one thing.
And it's gone global. It's on every continent, but
yeah,
Africa now too.
And incredible love and gratitude to these younger people. They catch so much shit. And I keep going back to that SDS, the Port Huron statement, right? We are children of this generation, bred in these modest comfort, housed on diversity, and looking uncomfortably at the world we inherit. And that's clearly what we're seeing today in real time. These kids, they know what the police are like. They're not under any illusions. And I think they know what the future's like too. And that's why they're just saying the hell with it. And they are such a courageous example, especially when juxtaposed to like these utterly gutless garbage politicians in the United States, with only a few exceptions. Much love to them.
Yeah, and just the movement into the next piece, which is around professors and scientists and leaders of organizations who are actually also standing with this resistance, is this is very much like a speech issue. Deborah Archer, who's the head of the ACLU, actually withdrew yesterday from the commencement speech at CUNY Law because of the crackdown that the NYPD and the New York colleges have been doing. A climate scientist named Genevieve Gunther announced that she was canceling her scheduled keynote address at the Symposium on Climate and Language, which she was supposed to give on Friday. Her part of it is that she's drawing a connection between this and the repression of free speech that's related to the climate movement, to the anti-pipeline movement, which you've done a lot of shows on that. It's something very much near and dear to my heart. She said that ignoring this authoritarian response to a protest makes the climate emergency worse because it normalizes the behavior of anti-democratic forces allied with fossil fuel interests, who are the most powerful enemies of a livable climate and our children. And then the other two things I want to note on this sort of new dissent that's happening is former New Yorker editor Aaron Overby on Wednesday called for all journalists of conscience to boycott the Pulitzer Prizes, which are actually administered by Columbia University next week.
Yeah, and Stephen Hahn, who's a Pulitzer-winning historian, has actually withdrawn from the committee and put out a very moving statement about that.
Yeah, NYPD vis-a-vis Columbia, or Columbia University vis-a-vis the NYPD threatened student journalists this week, and even the Columbia School of Journalism dean was threatened with arrest during the raid on Hamilton Hall.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I want to say about people speaking out and people who are like around this free speech issue is that the Goldman Prize was actually held in the Bay Area this week, which is the sort of the big award for environmental campaigners and organizers. And the winner from the US, Andrea Vadare, who is from California, she actually won for fighting for air quality issues in the Inland Empire of California, actually went off script during her acceptance speech and condemned what was happening in Gaza, condemned what was happening on student campuses. In many ways, the Goldmans are a very conservative group of people, and I'm sure a lot of their donors who care about the environment and climate probably do support Israel. And so that was like very courageous on her part as well.
Yeah.
And the kind of thing that is concerning to me is that we're actually seeing relatively silence from still some of these bigger liberal institutions who are tied into who want to be part of this movement, who actually talk about the future, who talk about the kids. I can't tell you how many times I've heard climate activists quote Greta Thunberg and that sort of thing. And then it's relatively silent from climate leaders, from climate influencers, from climate groups, despite the fact that the people that we're supposed to be organizing are actually being crushed by the police and by university administrators in many ways. And so it's very disheartening. Same with the labor movement. Is we saw tweets from Sean Payne this week, which was good, and we saw the UAW local at UCLA, and they're talking about a statewide strike as well. But it's good to see that happening, but we need to see more. Are they going to protests? Are they actually calling for strikes on these campuses? That sort of thing. What other labor unions have been doing that other than Sean Payne?
Actually, before I forget, I should have mentioned up front. Today, I talked again to Mike Alcapede report, and we're now going to be having a regular kind of show, probably weekly, where we talk to Mike about labor issues, and he brought that up, the kind of role of labor What I did not know is 1/3 of the UAW is now college graduates. So they've done a good job of organizing in that sector. And it's time for them to stand up with more than tweets, right? It's funny, right? Because another one of these Biden selling points that keep getting shoved down our throat is he's going to save democracy. And this whole election is about the future of American democracy. And when you have police out there openly mugging journalists and killing journalists in Gaza, it's hard to say you believe in democracy. And you mentioned the environment. I mean, we had Josh Frank on to talk about that. We've read a lot about it as well. Gaza is ecocide as well, right? It's not just they're killing people, they're destroying the environment.
And they're weaponized. We hear a lot about how they're weaponizing famine to wage war on the people of Gaza. They're also weaponizing environmental destruction against the people of Gaza. But they can't go back. It's like the water and the soil and the air are just going to be so bad that people won't be able to live there.
There are places in Vietnam right now where you still won't eat the fish or drink the water because of dioxin from the 1960s. So this is something that people don't think about. There's massive human cost involved in this. And there is an environmental legacy which lasts, who knows how long, right? It's really terrifying. Since you mentioned environmentalists, I want to talk a little bit about the university professors, since that's my world. And again, it's been inspiring. A lot of universities now, we see these photos of these professors who are, standing, locked in arms, trying to protect students, although the police don't care, right? They're pushing 60-some-year-old profs to the ground and beating anthropology professors and the head of the philosophy department at Emory University and things like that.
History professor at Dartmouth, like a 60-ish old woman.
Yes, but so a lot of the universities, I think the professors have stood up, and I think that's really great. A lot of them have said, I don't really know what the students are doing, but the bigger issue here forces me to go out. But along with that comes, as usual, right, the criticism of a lot of these liberals. Language and words are important. I think all of us agree with that. But a lot of liberals do have a fetish about that. And I've recently seen a lot of people saying, I'm going out there because I support free speech, but I really don't like what the students are doing. I don't really like the protesters. They're saying from the river to the sea, and they're chanting intifada, and they're calling Israel, the Israeli leaders, a genocide. And they're saying that if you support them, you support genocide and blah, 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 right? First of all, I think all those things are true, right? I mean, from the river to the sea doesn't have any real connection. It actually shows up in what is it, the Likud party original statement, right? So from the river to the sea is no call to kill anybody. Intifada is a word for uprising. And if you don't see a need for uprising right now, then, I don't know what's going on. But it's just troubling now to see like the ferocity with which liberals go after these students for their language, for their words, for their thoughts, right? At the same time, they are doing this, right? They're not condemning Israel. They're not saying, of course they're out there. They've created an equivalence, right? Chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, becomes the same as destroying the Al-Shifa hospital and burying 500 people underneath it, right? They're both bad. We condemn both sides equally, right? And you got to give the far, you got to give credit. They're brutal, they're fucked up, but they're consistent, right? Whereas liberals, if Trump were doing this, it would be totally different. And that part's true. And people who say that, conservatives who say, oh, if Trump were doing this, you'd be out in the street. They're right, right? People today who are supporting this would definitely be out in the streets. And instead, they're weaponizing these scurrilous charges of anti-Semitism. And again, everybody knows anti-Semitism is real. We're aware of what happened in Charlottesville when Heather Heyer was killed, right? Jews will not replace us. And Trump says they're fine people, right? We're aware of what happened at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. We're aware of 20 dead there, right? There's real anti-Semitism in the United States. No one says there isn't, right? But if you look at all of these massive data sets of anti-Semitic actions on campus, the ones I've seen all indicate that they're based on slogans and chants and making people feel uncomfortable by talking about Israeli genocide and things like that, right? The violence on campus is almost a monopoly held by the cops, by the authorities. And yet we keep weaponizing anti-Semitism, which is really an ugly trick, right? To accuse somebody of something like that because you don't want to actually have a debate. But a lot of these people who are saying, we don't really like what they're saying, but we defend their right to protest, are silent about what Israel is actually doing. And that's the problem with this. We said that the other day on our show, right? We're talking about this instead of talking about what's going on in Israel. There's an invasion of Rafah is likely imminent, right? And which is why campuses are going to continue to be tumultuous, right? It's also worth noting that we now in the United States on campuses have less right to criticize Israel than we do the United States. They're like anti-BDS laws, right? Things like that. Like essentially, that's a foreign government. And they're saying, now I can go out and say, nuke China. If I went out to campus and held up a sign that said, nuke China, and they pat me on the back, right? They give me, an endowed chair, right? Or something like that.
Nuke Putin, especially.
Nuke Putin, right? Absolutely. Murder Putin. Yeah. People do this openly and nothing happens, right? They're advocating violence, right? And it's ironic, right? What Biden said, there's a right to protest, but not the chaos. Isn't that what the people defending January 6th are saying? Right? And they're making equivalents there. Like Don Lemon, no wonder there's a million reasons he should have been fired. Probably the wrong one at CNN. I don't remember it. But Don Lemon says, this is just like January 6th. Oh, for Christ's sake, really? Are they handing guillotines out? Are they carrying guns? Are they killing cops? No, this is the liberal mind. And it's something we should be used to by now. But it continues. And on campuses, we're seeing that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of courageous professors who are standing up. We're also seeing a lot of people who want it both ways and who want it to go away and won't talk about it. And all they care about is Trump. They do have Trump derangement syndrome. And Trump is an evil, monstrous human. I'm terrified of him being president for another 4 years. But at the same time, he doesn't have, his fingerprints aren't all over this one. Biden's are, Blinken's are, Schumer, Pelosi. Hakeem Jeffries said he saw nothing wrong with the police response at Columbia today, right? This is the guy that Republicans attack as being this radical socialist. And yet he's on the side of the cops, except for Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Summer Lee and a couple more.
Cori Bush, yeah.
Cori Bush and Greg Cesar. AOC has been she's been going for photo ops with Biden, wearing aviators and stuff. She's said a few things, but she hasn't actually been in the lead in this. But with few exceptions, this has Democratic fingerprints all over it, this repression. And it's not something we're happy about. We don't have any affinity for the Democrats. The point is, it's just a reality. It's just true. And there's a lot of professors who, I'm glad they're defending free speech and protest on campus, but they're also doing it in I think, a really backhanded way, which kind of makes the students even more vulnerable. We don't really like what you're doing and we don't agree with you and we don't think Israel's a problem. You should be beaten up for it, right? You should be getting beaten up for it. And that's not a terribly strong statement. But what do you always say? Liberals go to brunch and conservatives go to war or something like that? Or
yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Liberals go to brunch, the right wingers go to war.
Go to war, yeah. I always say it's Elmo versus Darth Vader, and it's really unfortunate and tragic, and it's going to continue for some time. Campuses, the semesters will be ending soon at universities, so it'll be interesting to see what happens because so many of these schools have a lot of students who commute. They don't live there, especially these private schools like Columbia, which recruit from all over the world, really. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming weeks as the semesters dwindle down. But I don't think these protests are going away because obviously, Israel is not going to quit killing and destroying and committing atrocities.
No, and the Democratic National Convention is going to be in Chicago this summer in August, I believe. And
deja vu all over again.
Another historical parallel maybe headed our way. Although I'm sure that the Democrats will do everything they can to put that on Zoom.
They're going to put like a fence about 10 miles around the convention site.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that we're seeing some pretty outrageous language and legislation coming from people in Congress. Tom Cotton had some crazy statement today about how every campus in America is a mini Gaza, implying that we need to treat them the way that the Israelis treat Gaza. But then also there's all these other weird dynamics where, 20-something Republicans voted against the aid bill to Israel. And then there's this new anti-Semitic speech law that they're also trying to pass. It
would create an obligation for the Department of Justice to study and take action against anti-Semitism on campus. And the majority of Democrats voted for it as well. But one notable critic was Matt Gaetz, defender of liberty and freedom. He called it ridiculous. He said it was an assault on the Constitution. It's an upside down freaking world, right? When Matt Gaetz becomes the voice of liberal free thinking on this particular issue.
And I do also want to lift up that Jerry Nadler, who's the longest serving Jewish member of the House and a huge supporter of Israel, also opposes it as well.
Yeah. And obviously, I have no love at all for Matt Gaetz. And this is just who knows what goes on in his fevered head. But he's actually right on this one.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that. But
Gaetz also voted against Israel aid too. So
yeah. Probably because he's anti-Semitic. I would say in his case, there's a much better case to be made for real anti-Semitism than there is for saying from the river to the sea or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but yeah, it's strange times. Obviously, unfortunately, we're talking about this again. I wish we weren't, but I wish for a lot of things, including we wish Israel wasn't destroying Palestine. And other than a few newspaper stories, Israel's destroying the West Bank too, not in the same way, but there's been a significant increase in settlements. Yeah, right. Significant increase in settlements. And there's ultimately the goal, obviously, of displacing the entire Arab population. It's UCLA, the students were actually chanting, the Zionist students were actually chanting, this is the second Nakba, right? And that's not subtle. That's not subtle.
No.
And these police are just so vigorously and enthusiastically attacking these kids. And some of it could be, I know in the 60s, there were cases where the police relished going in, especially to elite campuses, because you have these like working class cops and these spoiled kids, the kind of Mustang Maoists and
the bums.
Yeah, people like that. And that's what Mike Johnson said, right? Go back to class. Your parents are spending good tuition. That tuition means you have a right to fucking protest on that campus. That's what I pay tuition for, to have a right to say what I want to on campus without the police coming in. I got to believe a lot of parents from NYU and Columbia are like Wall Street lawyers and brokers and politically connected. And I suspect we haven't seen the end of this. The lawsuits are going to come flying fast and furiously soon enough, right? But who pays for that? Police union doesn't pay for it. Eric Adams ain't going to pay for it, right? It's going to be New York. They'll have to close more libraries and schools and public health centers and things like that to pay for police violence, right?
But they'll give the NYPD more money for future protest control.
Look at the risks they're taking. They're going up against 63-year-old philosophy professors at Emory. Those are mean hombres, man. Those are mean people. Come on, man. Come after the philosophy department. Show how tough you are, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty scary shit. Yeah, it really is. Anyway, hopefully there are more outside agitators out there. There's a great line in Reds, great movie, which we've included on our list of best political movies. But Louise Bryant was testifying before Congress, and they asked her if she was a communist agitator. And she said, keep asking me questions like that, and you'll see how agitated I could get. And I think that's where we are. Bring it, mothers, because we'll just get more agitated.
It's clearly what we're seeing with students on campus. They're not backing off, to their credit.
Yeah, what do they got to lose at this point? They've grown up with 9/11 and the meltdown of 08 and 09 and climate change and COVID and
school shootings,
2020 school shootings.
Right? What's often pointed out on social media is the tactics they're using to barricade themselves in buildings, or the tactics that the administrations teach them to deal with school shootings. The cops often are stand around and drink coffee.
Well, yeah, I keep thinking of that line from The Godfather, don't let my brother come out of there with just his hand. And that's kind of what you're seeing with the cops at Uvalde. They're standing there with something in their hand while a young guy slaughters 22 students, right? But they're going in and going totally medieval against philosophy professors and students having cedars and the Jewish Voice for Peace and things like that.
At the University of Texas Dallas protest, when the kids were standing off with the cops, they were chanting, "Who felled you? Really? Uvalde? You felled Uvalde," because it was the highway patrol. It was the state troopers.
Yeah. So they're great at beating up students or killing migrants along the border. But when it comes to actually like stopping crime, it's a little dicey. I guess a little dirty, it could be dangerous. Yeah, I don't know. Kind of hard to polish this situation. It's pretty rough, but there is a great deal of inspiration coming, especially from these young folks who really do deserve our support and admiration and inspiration. And I'm sure there are all kinds of support groups, bail groups, things like that, legal aid. Look that up if you can and help them if you can.
We're trying to share some stuff too.
We'll try to find that. Maybe even have somebody on to talk about that, since this won't be the last. Unfortunately, this is going to be the last of it, unless the world suddenly becomes full of rainbows and lollipops and unicorns and all that kind of stuff.
Folks, you've been listening to the Green and Red podcast, talking about fighting the power, fighting the law and order Democrats that are cracking down on campuses. If you like what you're hearing, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to this on an audio platform, please give us a rate and review. And then if you really like us, check us out at greenredpodcast.org and hit the support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. And if you want some swag, we still have lots of hat for $25. You can get a green and red trucker hat. Just send us an email at greenredpodcast@gmail. Then also, if you want a copy of Bob's first book, Masters of War, for a $35 donation, you can do the same thing. We'll get all of that to you. And we will talk to you again soon. As always, fight the power. All power to the students, all power to the people. Misbehave, make trouble, etc., etc. Talk to you soon.
We don't know the game. What we need is awareness. We can't kick